Readers, today is the day that we start our unit on fantasy. Some of you are avid fantasy readers already, and others of you might be a little unsure about this unit. Maybe you aren't quite sure about dragons and dwarves and epic quests where the world is imperiled. Friends, let's begin then by thinking about why we would even want to read fantasy in the first place. I came up with 3 reasons. Reason 1, the stories are incredible. These are wild, dangerous, romantic tales where the fate of mankind may rest on the choices made by one singular character. Everything in fantasy is more important, more intense, more vivid. Reason 2, because when you study fantasy, really you're studying the human condition. These stories are never really about elves and dwarves and hobbits. They're about the struggle between good and evil. They're about how power corrupts. They're about the quest to be better than who we are. And they're about how even the smallest among us can save the world. Reason 3, because if you become a powerful reader of fantasy, you are more likely to become a powerful reader of all texts. Fantasy novels are incredibly complicated. You have to figure out where the story takes place, what kind of world it is, who has power there, what the rules are in this world. You will enter narratives that stretch over many novels. You'll read hundreds and even thousands of pages. You will emerge like the characters in these stories, forever changed. I want all of this for you. I want you to embark with these characters on wild adventures that will make your head spin. I want you to feel the release that comes when you escape into another mythical world where magic happens. I want you to find stories that spread over many books that will keep you up at night and fill the corners of your lives with their secrets. You may or may not emerge from this unit as a fantasy fanatic, someone who plays Dungeons and Dragons for fun, or a follower of Avatar, maybe even a reader of manga. But you will, I am sure, know more about this wild and beautiful genre. You will, I hope, have more insight into what it means to be a human. And you will, I feel sure, emerge with an increased confidence that you can tackle truly complicated texts. Readers, today I want to teach you that as fantasy readers, your first task will be to figure out not just where your story happens, but what kind of place it is. One way you can do this work is to investigate clues about the time period and important magical elements. Use the covers, blurbs, and details from the beginning of the story to do this research. Experienced fantasy readers expect certain kinds of settings. Often, fantasy stories are set in a medieval world full of swords, horses, castles, dragons, and so forth, like the Lord of the Rings or Narnia. A second common setting is a futuristic world full of reminders of this world, but different and often troubled, like the Hunger Games. And the third common setting is the ordinary world, where it seems as first if everything is normal, but then gradually you will notice that there is an infiltration of magic. So there is this blending of the world we know with magical elements. Harry Potter is a lot like this. So knowledgeable fantasy readers know how to gather up clues right away about what kind of place they are in. Sometimes it's a little tricky because the story might not begin right away in the magical world. Now, The Hobbit, for instance, starts right off in a place full of creatures that only grow to be 3 feet tall, and they use carts and horses to farm, and there are wizards. So the reader knows right away that this place is magical. But other times, the story starts in an ordinary place, the here and now even, and you think it's all going to happen here, and then the characters are transported. That's what happens in Narnia. Peter, Edmund, Lucy, and Susan all walk through an enchanted wardrobe into the magical kingdom of Narnia. Whereas in Harry Potter, Harry starts off also in an ordinary world, but that ordinary world becomes magical. He doesn't go to another kingdom. He still lives in London, in the modern world, but magic enters and transforms the whole place. Okay, readers, I have tried to jumpstart your reading a bit. Here, as you can tell by giving you a little expertise on how fantasy stories tend to start. So that means that I expect you, from the very first moment you begin reading, to be alert for the details about what kind of place you are encountering in the story that you are reading. Things unfold rapidly in fantasy, so you have to get yourself oriented quickly before a dragon arrives and you get swept through a portal to another world. Watch how I do this work. I'm going to try to name what I do as a reader as I do it so you can see the steps that I follow. Then you'll have a chance to practice on the story that we're reading together, and of course afterward in the stories that you're reading. First, before I even open the pages, I look carefully at the book cover. I know that with such complicated stories, I want to get all the information I can from the cover. So I'm looking to see if there's a blurb that might tell me who this story is about, and more importantly, what kind of world this is. This book has no blurb. Well, that doesn't seem fair, but okay. So next I'll look at the cover art and the title, as those can also tell me a lot. The book is called The Paperback Princess, and there is a girl with a bent crown, a huge castle-like door, and a gigantic smoking dragon on the front cover. On the back cover, there is another image of the same dragon breathing cataclysmic fire over the head of the girl. Inside, the story starts like this. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. And there's a picture of a snotty-looking prince with his nose in the air and a strongly infatuated girl staring at him with hearts flying around her. The room looks like a castle with arched windows, stone walls, and old wooden chairs, and their clothes are definitely medieval. That means they're from the Middle Ages, like you'd see in the time of King Arthur. So I definitely see from the furniture and the buildings and the clothes that this story happens in a place that is medieval. On the next page, it says, unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Aha! So there is magic here too. This is not historical fiction from the actual Middle Ages. A dragon has now entered the scene, and that is definitely a magical creature. He has even magically managed to smash Elizabeth's castle and burn all of Elizabeth's clothes without harming her at all. Readers, I want to give you a chance to practice this work also. I'm going to return to the first chapter of The Thief of Always. If you were like me, as you listened, you were entranced and shocked with just how much happened and how wild the story was. In fact, I was as unsure as Harvey was about what kind of trip he was actually going on. Friends, we dove right into this story so that everything happened really quickly and without any warning. Harvey was moping around his house when Rictus suddenly showed up. We barely had time to consider if he were real or magical. This time, though, let's see if we could have gathered more clues a little bit earlier and therefore giving ourselves a deeper understanding of what kind of place Harvey is living in. Readers, this is the cover and back of the book. This is what the blurb on the back of the book says. Mr. Hood's holiday house has stood for 1,000 years, welcoming countless children into its embrace. It is a place of miracles where every childhood whim may be satisfied. There is a price to be paid, of course, but young Harvey Swick, bored with his life and beguiled by Mr. Hood's wonders, does not stop to consider the consequences. It is only when the house shows its darker face, when Harvey discovers the pitiful creatures that dwell in its shadows, that he comes to doubt Mr. Hood's philanthropy. But the house and its mysterious architecture are not about to release their captive without a battle. Mr. Hood has ambitions for his new guest, for Harvey's soul burns brighter than any he has encountered in 10 centuries. This time, follow my example in using the strategy of really researching the time period and the magical elements within the story by paying extra close attention to the covers. I notice on the front cover that there is a sort of ominous looking house and in the background. It certainly doesn't look like a cheerful place. In fact, it looks something out of a horror movie or a place that might be duplicitous. Can you see how much better prepared I am now that I have read the blurb and studied the cover I am as a reader? If I had done this analysis first, I certainly would have understood more of what was going on in chapter 1. From the blurb, I can tell that Harvey lives in a modern world, but it's a world where magic happens. We find out that there are characters with magical powers, and some of them are obviously evil. Within the very first pages and images of this book, we are given a picture of what some of those characters might look like. We know that this can be a scary place full of dark magic. This is not a place full of happy fairies. It is definitely a place full of menace. Readers, this work is going to be very important for you now. The novels you're choosing are complicated. The places are going to be unusual and significant. You are going to want to use these strategies to be alert to the details about these places and their physical and psychological implications. So not just today, but whenever you pick up a complex novel, you'll want to research the place carefully using the covers, the blurb, and all the details in the beginning of the story. Readers, before you head off to do this important work today, I think there is another question you can ask as you research the places in your fantasy novels, which will be very intriguing. The question is, who has power here? And then you might also add to it, how do you know? Go ahead, try that inquiry question out today as you read and see where it takes you. Take a second as you read to think and possibly jot, who has power in this setting, and how do I know that? I'm eager for you to be able to do this work today. Off you go.